I'm Ellie, 21 years old, and I'm finally a college graduate, although getting here felt like climbing a mountain blindfolded. The worst part? It started when I was 18, with a move by my parents that blindsided me completely. It was the summer after high school, and I was actually looking forward to starting community college in the fall. I chose a school near home, figuring it was the most practical choice, financially speaking. College is ridiculously expensive, and commuting seemed smarter than dorm life. I had a decent chunk of savings from my part-time job at the cafe, and I thought my parents would at least pitch in a little to help me get through it. I guess I was naive. One evening, Mom and Dad called me into the kitchen. I honestly thought they were going to give me some kind of "you're doing great" pep talk, but I couldn't have been more wrong. Instead, I got the full-blown adulting speech. The one about being independent and learning the value of a hard-earned dollar. All the usual platitudes. Then Mom dropped the bomb: they weren't going to pay for my college. Not a single cent. I was completely on my own. My stomach just plummeted. I wasn't expecting a free ride, but to offer zero support? No help with tuition, or books, or even gas for the commute. It felt like a punch to the gut. And then Dad, usually the quieter of the two, added, "If you want to keep living here, you'll need to start paying rent and buying your own groceries. It's only fair." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was living in the same bedroom I'd had since I was a kid, still surrounded by my old posters. Now, on top of everything else, they expected me to pay rent. For context, it's not like my parents were struggling financially. Mom's an accountant and Dad's a project manager. They're comfortable. This wasn't about needing the money, it was about teaching me a lesson. Meanwhile, my younger sister, Kylie, who was 16 at the time, was living this fairy tale existence. Kylie has always been the golden child. Straight A's, cheerleading captain, the one everyone adores. My parents practically hang on her every word. I wish I could say that I stood up for myself right then and there, but I didn't. I didn't want to start a fight or seem ungrateful. So I just swallowed my pride and decided I would figure it out, that I would pay rent and work my way through college. I've always been pretty independent anyway. But inside I was furious. Rent was only the beginning. Tuition, books, gas, groceries, it all added up so fast. I started picking up extra shifts at the cafe, sometimes working until late at night. I also took on small baking jobs, making cupcakes and cookies for events. It felt like all I did was work, and even then, it never seemed like enough. The idea of moving out crossed my mind constantly. I even started browsing apartments near campus, but rent in this area is insane. How do people even afford it? Every place I looked at was way beyond my reach, even if I found roommates. I quickly realized moving out wasn't an option, at least not yet. So, I made a promise to myself: I'd stick it out at home until graduation. I'd keep my head down, save every penny I could, and the moment I had enough, I was cutting ties. That ambition became my driving force. Every late-night shift I pulled, every dollar I meticulously saved, every invitation from friends I politely declined, each sacrifice was a calculated step in my personal escape plan, a means to break free and never glance back. But biding my time under their roof was a constant battle. Mom and Dad weren't exactly making it a walk in the park. Before my community college classes even started, they were bringing up the subject of rent. They'd casually drop reminders about the due date, even when I was a day or two away from paying. It wasn't as if I was habitually late, it was more like they enjoyed holding it over me. Meanwhile, Kylie was treated like royalty, showered with gifts as if it were perpetually Christmas. I remember one shopping trip where they took her to get a new cheer uniform. She came back laden with bags of clothes, shoes, and accessories, practically radiating joy. When I plucked up the courage to ask Mom if they could perhaps help me with my textbooks for the coming semester, she simply gave me a blank look and said, "Ellie, you need to learn to budget better. Kylie doesn't have these kinds of expenses." That response stung more than I could put into words. It wasn't merely about the money, it was about their apparent indifference to my struggles, my aspirations. Kylie didn't exactly make things easier, either. She wasn't a bad person, I wouldn't say that. But she was definitely accustomed to getting her way, to a life of privilege. She'd flaunt her new possessions or complain about the rigors of cheer practice, all while I was functioning on a mere 3 hours of sleep, juggling work and scrimping for school. One particularly brutal night, after a double shift, I came home completely drained, only to find her sprawled on the couch, sporting a brand new pair of AirPods. "Oh, Mom and Dad got these for me," she said with a nonchalant shrug, as if it were the most commonplace occurrence. "You should get some too. They're amazing." I just stared at her, the exhaustion pressing down on me, and replied, "Yeah, maybe when I don't have to pay rent." She rolled her eyes, dismissing my comment, and went back to the hypnotic scroll of TikTok. There were moments, I confess, when I wanted to unleash a torrent of frustration to make my parents understand the inherent unfairness of it all. But I knew it would be a futile exercise. They had their favorite, their golden child, and I was simply the one who contributed to the household expenses. So, I swallowed my feelings, kept my mouth shut, and doubled down on my plan to escape. College was supposed to be this exciting new chapter in my life, a period of growth and discovery. Instead, it felt like pure survival from day one. I envisioned having the time to adjust, to establish a routine, maybe even enjoy myself a little. But no such luck. Between attending classes, working endless hours, and having my parents constantly reminding me about rent, I was perpetually running on fumes. My day started at 6 a.m. sharp, out the door by 7 o'clock, and at my local community college for morning classes. I'd try to squeeze in some studying between lectures, but by the time noon arrived, I was already hurrying to my shift at the cafe. Most days, I wouldn't get off work until 9 o'clock or 10 p.m., after which I'd drag myself home and collapse into bed. And weekends? Forget about any semblance of relaxation. That's when I would do baking for small catering orders since, surprise, working part-time wasn't enough to make ends meet. I'd love to say I handled it all with grace and efficiency, but that would be a complete fabrication. The cafe was a chaotic environment more often than not. We were perpetually understaffed, and the lingering effects of the pandemic had made people even more demanding. Every shift felt like running a marathon. I'd be behind the counter expertly crafting lattes, then sprinting to the drive-thru window, and then dealing with yet another unreasonable customer complaining that their coffee wasn't hot enough. All while knowing a mountain of assignments was awaiting my attention at home. To add insult to injury, my parents offered absolutely no support or understanding. They witnessed me dragging myself home late at night, yet instead of offering a kind word or a helping hand, they'd hit me with, "Don't forget your rent's due Friday," or "We noticed the electricity bill went up. Are you leaving your light on?" I wanted to explode with frustration every single time. And, of course, while I was working myself to the bone to stay afloat, Kylie had zero responsibilities, no job, and all the time in the world to dedicate to cheer practice, socializing with her friends, or mindlessly scrolling through TikTok for hours on end. I'd walk through the door and find her comfortably situated on the couch, surrounded by her favorite snacks, engrossed in whatever new Netflix show had captured her attention, while Mom cheerfully prepared her a smoothie to keep her energy levels up. It was as if we were living in parallel universes under the same roof. The financial stress was relentless, a constant weight on my shoulders. The rent wasn't exorbitant compared to what I'd pay if I lived independently, but it still felt like an insult to be charged for the privilege of residing in my childhood home. Add in all the other expenses, textbooks, transportation, groceries, and I was perpetually broke. There were weeks when I'd open my banking app and simply stare at the meager balance, desperately trying to figure out how I was going to stretch $42 until my next paycheck. And asking for financial help? Absolutely not. That was out of the question. It's funny the things you remember. I remember asking Mom, just once, if she could swing the grocery bill for a week. I'd sunk $200 into a textbook, and it felt like a significant chunk of my already meager funds. The way she looked at me, you'd think I'd asked her to take out a second mortgage. "Ellie," she said, all long-suffering, "we're already doing so much for you, letting you stay here." Letting me stay here? As if I wasn't paying rent, as if I wasn't pulling my weight. And certainly more than Kylie, who still got her allowance, month in, month out, with never a request for contribution, not even a dime. Things really spiraled downward during midterms. I felt like I was drowning in assignments, fueled by caffeine and sheer willpower. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. To make matters worse, my hours at the cafe had been cut. Apparently, lattes weren't selling like hotcakes. I tried to compensate with extra baking jobs, those late-night texts from strangers on community boards, *, "Can you bake for this event? I need the sweets like yesterday, star." But there are only so many hours in a day, and my body was starting to wear out. One weekend, a lifesaver appeared in the form of a giant birthday order, 100 cupcakes, and a custom-designed cake. The money was amazing, a literal dream come true, but it meant pulling an all-nighter. I spent what felt like forever covered in flour, frosting, and sprinkles, finally finishing just in time to deliver the order, rush home, quickly shower, and then head straight to class, already buzzing from the sugar, but also depleted. That afternoon, I dragged myself into the kitchen, utterly exhausted. There they were, Mom and Kylie, happily baking cookies for fun. Kylie looked up, all innocent. "Oh, hey, Ellie. You should join us. It's so relaxing." I swear, for a split second, I wanted to grab that tray of cookies and hurl it through the window. Instead, I mumbled something about being tired and escaped to my room. I collapsed on my bed, clothes and all, and didn't move until the next morning. By the end of that semester, I was a walking zombie, completely burned out. My grades didn't completely tank, but they weren't exactly stellar either. I was just barely managing to stay afloat. And every time I thought about how hard I was working, how much I was sacrificing just to make ends meet, a deep, simmering anger would bubble up inside me. It wasn't fair. I was trying my damnedest to be independent, to stand on my own 2 feet, just like they supposedly wanted, and they couldn't even acknowledge it. Meanwhile, Kylie was getting everything handed to her on a silver platter. I honestly don't know how I made it through that first year. It felt like I was constantly running uphill, dragging a backpack filled with bricks. But I kept telling myself it wouldn't be forever. I just had to survive a little longer. What I didn't fully grasp then was that things weren't just unfair, they were deliberately skewed. The realization, when it finally hit me, was like a punch to the gut. By the time Kylie reached her senior year of high school, it felt like my parents had launched a full-scale campaign to crown her the family's golden child. It wasn't that I was blind to the fact they favored her, it was just that this was a whole new level of bias. They were treating Kylie's college plans like a matter of national security, a life-altering mission with everyone at their beck and call. Months in advance, they were whisking her away on campus tours, turning them into mini-family vacations. They came back, Kylie flaunting a new haul of university merch, hoodies, water bottles, planners, you name it, as if she'd already been awarded a scholarship. All the while, I was struggling to survive. My budget was so tight, I was constantly behind on something. Tuition payments, books, car maintenance, always something looming and overdue. I couldn't afford to take as many classes as I needed, so my graduation date kept getting pushed further and further into the future. At this rate, Kylie would probably get her degree before I would. I remember one night, Mom walked into the kitchen while I was cramming for a test. I was already on edge because I'd forgotten to submit another online assignment and was probably going to fail. Without even a "how's it going?" or any normal greeting, she just dropped the bombshell. "We're thinking of getting Kylie a car for college." I just stared at her, trying to make sense of it. "She's going to need something reliable," Mom continued, as if it was the most logical thing in the world. "You know how hard it is to get around without a car." I almost laughed. "You wouldn't even help me with a bus pass when I started college, and now you're buying Kylie a brand new car?" Mom gave me that look, the one that screamed, "Don't you dare be dramatic. Ellie, you've always been more independent. Kylie needs more support to succeed." I didn't say anything. I just went back to my notes, trying to pretend that I wasn't seething inside, that the sheer inequity wasn't boiling my blood. But the thing is, it wasn't just the car. That was just the cherry on top of the mountain of BS. My parents were laying all their cards on the table for Kylie's college experience, tuition, rent, a monthly allowance, the whole shebang. And these were the same people who'd lectured me on the value of $1. It felt like watching someone else live the life I'd always wanted, the one that was apparently out of reach. The favoritism felt like a punch to the gut. Mom was suddenly glued to Pinterest, spending hours curating dorm decor with Kylie, buying matching bedding sets and those cute storage bins everyone has. Dad, who usually struggles with his emails, transformed into a tech guru, guiding her towards the perfect laptop. They even meticulously crafted a college prep budget which, let's be honest, was really just an excuse for a shopping spree disguised as responsible planning. I remember one night, they were all huddled around the coffee table in the living room, surrounded by campus brochures and printouts. Kylie was showing off her Pinterest-worthy dorm room vision board while Dad scribbled down notes like he was brokering some huge deal. "What are you guys doing?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Mom barely looked up. "We're helping Kylie decide between schools. It's a huge decision, honey. We want her to be prepared." Prepared? Right? The day Kylie's acceptance letters started arriving, it felt like they'd won the lottery. She got into her dream school and they threw her a celebratory dinner, complete with her favorite meal and a cake that screamed, "Congrats, Kylie," in bright pink frosting. I didn't even get a congratulatory text when I was accepted to community college. During dinner, Mom wouldn't stop gushing about how proud she was of Kylie and how hard she'd worked. At one point, she turned to me and said, "Ellie, you must be so proud of your sister. She's going to do amazing things." I wanted to scream that Kylie didn't know the meaning of hard work. She was gliding through life on charm and parental privilege while I was drowning in student loans and mainlining caffeine. After that, I found excuses to skip family dinners. It was easier to focus on my own struggle than to watch them build a gilded tower for Kylie. The last straw came a couple of weeks before Kylie's move-in day. I came home from work to find a shiny, pre-owned SUV parked in the driveway. I assumed it was a friend visiting until Kylie came bursting out of the house, squealing, "They got me a car." I just stood there stunned. That night, I overheard Mom and Dad discussing Kylie's monthly allowance. They were apparently giving her enough to cover groceries, gas, and spending money. Meanwhile, my diet consisted of ramen and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches because that's all I could afford. I wanted to scream, to point out the blatant unfairness of it all, but what was the point? They would just repeat their usual mantra, "Kylie needs extra support, it's not favoritism, etc." So, I bit my tongue. Kylie, of course, remained blissfully unaware. She'd occasionally pop into my room to show me pictures of her chosen dorm decorations or ramble about how excited she was for college. One time, she actually said, "Ellie, you're so lucky you got to figure out independence early. I don't know if I could handle everything you do." Lucky? She thought I was lucky? I wanted to laugh, but I just plastered on a fake smile and said, "Yeah, it's been great," and went back to my homework. The favoritism had become unbearable. It was so blatant that I started to wonder if they even saw me as their daughter or just some random person who happened to share their DNA. For the longest time, I didn't tell anyone how I was feeling. What was the point? My friends were supportive, but they couldn't truly understand. Bringing it up at home was like talking to a brick wall. But one night, I found myself calling Grandpa Hank. Growing up, I had spent countless hours in his bakery, learning how to measure flour accurately, crack eggs without getting shells in the batter, and create the perfect frosting swirls on cupcakes. It was his way of showing me that hard work could also be fulfilling. He never judged me, never pressured me to be someone I wasn't. He just let me be me, and that was exactly what I needed at that moment. It had been too long since I last spoke with Grandpa Hank. After retiring a few years ago, he and Grandma were finally living the life they always dreamed of. He'd spent his entire career building his bakery from the ground up, and once he finally decided to pass the torch, he entrusted it to one of his most dedicated managers, allowing him and Grandma to travel the world. It was their lifelong ambition, and the moment he took off his apron for good, they embarked on their adventure. The only snag was Grandpa's distinct lack of technological prowess. He could barely manage a phone call, let alone navigate social media, which made staying connected a challenge. I'd get the occasional postcard or a rare phone call, but mostly I relied on second-hand accounts of their travels from my parents. They'd only recently returned home when I decided to call him that night. I suppose they'd decided to settle down a bit. The truth was, I'd been avoiding calling because I didn't want to burden him with my problems. He was retired, content, and finally living his dream. The last thing I wanted was to taint that with my own personal chaos. But that night, the weight was too much to bear alone. Hearing his voice on the other end of the line instantly eased some of the tension in my shoulders. "Hey, kiddo," he greeted me, his voice as warm and familiar as ever. "What's up?" I didn't hold back. I spilled everything, the mountain of debt I was drowning in, the way my parents were channeling all their resources into Kylie's college education while expecting me to cover my own rent. I launched into a tirade about the car they bought her, the allowance they planned on giving her, and how I was struggling to stay afloat while juggling school and work. Grandpa listened intently, allowing me to vent without interruption. I could hear his soft sounds of acknowledgement every so often, as if he were piecing together a puzzle in his mind. Then, completely out of the blue, he stopped me mid-sentence. "Ellie," he said slowly, "didn't your parents use the money I gave them for your education?" I was taken aback. "What money?" A long silence followed, and when he spoke again, there was a noticeable shift in his tone. He wasn't angry, not yet, but there was an underlying sharpness, as if he were trying to maintain his composure. "When you were 16, your grandmother and I set aside $50,000 for your college fund. We entrusted it to your parents because they assured us they'd use it to cover your tuition and expenses. Are you telling me they never mentioned it?" A sharp pain shot through my gut, like a sudden blow. "They never said a word," I stammered, my voice trembling. "I've been paying for everything myself, every single thing." Grandpa let out a heavy sigh, the kind that seemed to carry the weight of years of disappointment. "Ellie, that money was intended for you. We gave it to them hoping to give you a solid foundation so you wouldn't have to struggle. If I'd known this was how they'd use it." His voice trailed off, but I could detect the rising anger in his tone. It took a moment for the information to sink in. All this time, I'd been led to believe that my parents couldn't afford to help me and that they wanted me to learn the value of independence through hard work. Now, I was discovering that they'd had $50,000 specifically earmarked for me, and they hadn't even bothered to tell me about it. They had lied to me. "Ellie," Grandpa said, finally breaking the silence, "they lied to you. That money was yours, not theirs, not Kylie's, yours." I was speechless. A part of me wanted to burst into tears, but mostly I just felt numb. The past few years of struggling to make ends meet, pushing myself to exhaustion, and falling behind in my studies suddenly felt unbearable. What do you think they did with it? I asked, my voice barely audible. I don't know, Grandpa replied, and for the first time I could hear genuine anger in his voice, but I'm going to find out. Another long pause followed, and then he added, Ellie, you're not alone in this. I'll take care of it. You just concentrate on your studies, okay? Hearing those words brought a sense of relief I hadn't experienced in years. For so long, I'd felt like I was carrying the world on my shoulders, believing that no one cared or even noticed. But now, for the first time, I felt like someone was standing by my side. Thanks, Grandpa, I managed to say, trying to steady my voice. Anytime, kiddo, he replied. And Ellie, don't let this break you. You're stronger than they give you credit for. After hanging up, the numbness slowly gave way to a rising tide of anger. How could they? That was the question that kept looping in my head, each time laced with fresh bitterness. How could my own parents do this? This wasn't some casual oversight, it was a calculated act, a deliberate choice to withhold something meant to alleviate my struggles, knowing exactly how much I was drowning. It wasn't solely about the money, although, God, I needed it. It was the stinging realization that they had actively chosen to watch me flounder while simultaneously elevating Kylie to some untouchable status. It felt like a betrayal on multiple levels, a lie to Grandpa, a theft from me, and then, adding insult to injury, they expected me to be grateful for the crumbs they tossed my way. Sleep was a distant luxury that night. My thoughts kept circling back to countless moments, instances where I had humbly asked for their help, a small loan, just enough to bridge the gap, only to be met with dismissals. I remembered Mom's lectures on budgeting, delivered with infuriating condescension while she was simultaneously splurging on Kylie's latest phone or financing another campus visit, solidifying her perfect future. And then the sacrifices I had made became brutally clear, the late nights at work blurring into early mornings, the skipped meals, the delayed graduation, all endured because I genuinely believed there was no other way, no alternative. All along, they possessed a secret stash of $50,000 that could have rewritten my entire story. The more I dwelled on it, the more the anger simmered, threatening to boil over. But underneath the burning resentment, a flicker of something else ignited, hope. Grandpa Hank wasn't a man of empty words or false promises. If he committed to handling this situation, I instinctively trusted him. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I sensed that I wasn't entirely alone in this agonizing ordeal. That realization didn't magically erase the pain, but it offered a fragile lifeline, something tangible to grasp. A few days later, my phone buzzed, Grandpa Hank's name flashing across the screen. I spoke with your parents, he announced, bypassing any customary greetings. Ellie, you won't believe the flimsy excuses they tried to feed me. A wave of apprehension washed over me. What did they say? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. They claimed they used the $50,000 your grandmother and I gifted them for general family expenses, he said, his voice laced with barely suppressed fury. I pressed him for specifics, and eventually, Mom sheepishly admitted they had been saving it specifically for Kylie's college fund. My stomach lurched. $50,000? That amount could have covered my tuition, rent, and every soul-crushing expense I had been scrambling to pay off for years. They had selfishly hoarded it, all to ensure Kylie's college experience was flawlessly seamless and stress-free. They had absolutely no right, Grandpa continued, his voice practically vibrating with anger. That money was intended for you, Ellie. I made it unequivocally clear to them that they are obligated to repay it every single cent, and if they fail to do so, they will be permanently removed from the will. I can't stay here anymore, Grandpa, I blurted out suddenly, the words escaping before I could fully process them. I can't bear to look at them knowing what they have done. Then don't, he responded without hesitation. There's a guest room here with your name already on the door, waiting. Pack your belongings and come over tonight. Consider it your new home. Moving out of my parents' house was the most straightforward, uncomplicated decision I had ever made. I didn't even afford them the courtesy of an explanation. The moment I hung up with Grandpa, I started packing my bags with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. At one point, Kylie sauntered past my room, her eyebrows arching in curiosity at the chaotic scene unfolding. What's going on? She inquired, seemingly oblivious to the turmoil that had been brewing. I'm moving out, I stated tersely, throwing another handful of clothes into a suitcase. She blinked in astonishment. Wait, what? Why? Ask Mom and Dad, I replied, zipping up the suitcase with a sharp finality. I didn't owe her any explanations, not after everything. I didn't see my parents that night, they were both conveniently out. I scribbled a brief note and left it on the kitchen counter. I'm moving in with Grandpa. Do not call me. And then I walked away. When I arrived at Grandpa's house, he was waiting for me with open arms at the front door. "Come in, kiddo," he said warmly, enveloping me in a comforting hug. "This is where you truly belong." The guest room was inviting and cozy, featuring a generously sized bed and a window that overlooked Grandpa's meticulously tended garden. It instantly felt more like home than my parents' house ever had. That night, for the first time in years, I drifted off to sleep without the familiar weight of the world pressing down on me. Of course, the newfound peace was fleeting. The next morning, the onslaught of calls began. Mom was the first to attempt contact. I ignored her call, but she left a voicemail that was so overly dramatic it almost bordered on comical. "Ellie, how could you just leave like this? Without a word. Do you even realize how this looks?" Her voice on the phone was sharp. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. Just come home and we can talk." My stomach churned. "No way." Then Dad called. His tone was calmer but just as infuriating. "Ellie, sweetheart, we know you're upset, but this isn't the right way. We're family, we can figure this out." Oh, suddenly now they wanted to figure things out? Where was that family spirit when I was drowning in debt and practically begging for help? The rest of the day was a blur of ignored calls and unanswered texts. Each notification was a stab of anxiety. Their messages swung wildly from hollow apologies to accusations that I was the one turning Grandpa against them. One text from Mom really stuck with me. "Ellie, you have no idea how difficult this has been for us. We were just trying to do what was best for everyone involved. Can't you see that?" I stared at that text for what felt like an eternity, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Finally, I replied, "No, Mom, you weren't trying to do what was best for everyone. You were doing what was best for Kylie, and you didn't care who you hurt in the process." The response came back almost instantly. "That's not fair, Ellie. We didn't mean to hurt you. We just thought you could handle it because you've always been so strong." There it was, that tired, old excuse I'd heard a million times. I didn't even bother replying. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard but moved nowhere. The next day, I knew I'd have to face them. I was at Grandpa's house, helping him with the bakery paperwork when I saw Mom's car pull into the driveway. A heavy sigh escaped me. "They're here," I mumbled. Grandpa, bless his heart, didn't seem surprised. "Let me deal with this," he said, getting up from the table and heading for the front door. I stayed put in the kitchen, the knot in my stomach tightening, but I could hear every word. Mom was already launching into her performance as soon as Grandpa opened the door. "Hank, we need to talk to Ellie," she said, her voice laced with that familiar strained sweetness. "She's being completely unreasonable about all of this." Grandpa didn't even let her set foot inside. "You mean all of this where you took $50,000 that wasn't yours?" "I think she's being perfectly reasonable." Mom sputtered, trying to defend her actions. "We didn't steal it, Hank. It was for the family." Her voice was shrill. "You were wrong." Grandma chimed in. "That money was specifically for Ellie, and you knew it. You made her struggle while you were busy spoiling Kylie rotten. You don't get to waltz in here and pretend you are the victims in all of this." I almost wanted to shout with joy from my post. Mom tried to interrupt, but Grandpa held up a hand. "If you're not here to apologize, you can both leave. Ellie deserves so much better than this, and I'm not going to stand by while you try to guilt her into forgiving you." There was a long, tense silence, and then I heard the unmistakable sound of Mom's car door slamming shut. She didn't even make it into the house. Once Grandpa demanded that they repay the $50,000 that they had stolen from me, Mom and Dad's entire comfortable little world began to unravel at the seams. They had been pretending that everything was completely normal, but Grandpa wasn't playing around. He set a deadline for the repayment, and when they realized he wasn't bluffing, their panic must have been intense. He made it clear that they needed to repay every single cent or they would be removed from his will. The consequences of their actions landed on Kylie almost immediately. Mom and Dad had been going to extreme lengths to cushion Kylie's transition to college. While she was living in a dorm room just like every other freshman, they had gone above and beyond to make it feel just like home. Kylie had absolutely everything she could possibly want: a mini fridge, a high-end coffee maker, perfectly matching decor, and even expensive electronics to help her study. She never had to worry about budgeting or working a part-time job. All she was responsible for was fully enjoying her college experience. Well, everything's different now. $50,000, that's what Mom and Dad had to pay back. Immediately, the purse strings were pulled tight. My care packages from them had always been a rarity, a special treat I could barely expect, but Kylie's weekly deliveries? Gone. The spending money they were planning to send her, the extra buffer I never had? Cancelled just like that. Apparently, even some of the fancy, unnecessary luxuries in her dorm had to be returned. It was almost satisfying. Suddenly, Kylie wasn't just their pampered darling anymore, she was facing the same financial realities the rest of us struggled with, and honestly, it felt like a long overdue equalization. The best part, at least for me, was finding out she had to get a part-time job. And naturally, I found out about it on Instagram. Kylie posted a mirror selfie, all pouty in some overpriced boutique, with a caption that read, "First day, working girl, LOL. New adventures." I almost choked on my coffee. She made it sound like some cute little hobby, a fun extracurricular. But I knew her. I knew she was probably absolutely miserable. And I wasn't wrong. It didn't take long for the facade to crumble. One night, my phone rang, and it was Kylie, sobbing so hysterically I could barely make out a word. Against every instinct I had, I answered. "Ellie," she wailed, her voice thick with tears, "everything's ruined." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, bracing myself. "What's ruined, Kylie?" "My life," she cried. "Mom and Dad aren't sending me any more money. They said they can't afford it, and now I have to work in a boutique." And then the sobs started again, louder this time. I rolled my eyes so hard it probably wasn't healthy. "Kylie, welcome to the real world. You're finally experiencing what I deal with every single day." Predictably, she didn't appreciate my attempts at perspective. "This is all your fault," she snapped, her voice turning sharp and accusatory. "If you hadn't told Grandpa, none of this would have happened." That actually made me laugh, a short, bitter sound. "Oh, I'm sorry. Did I pop your little bubble of privilege? Because as far as I'm concerned, you're just catching up to what I've been dealing with for years." Kylie started to say something else, some other dramatic pronouncement, but I was already done. "Look," I said, cutting her off, "if you want someone to blame, talk to Mom and Dad. They're the ones who have been stealing from my future to fund your perfect little life." She hung up on me after that, which frankly saved me the trouble of doing it myself. The weeks that followed were almost entertaining. Kylie started posting cryptic woe is me updates on social media about how hard life was, how she felt betrayed by the people she trusted most. It was laughable considering she'd spent her entire life being pampered and protected from reality. Now that she had to face even a tiny fraction of the challenges I'd been dealing with, she acted like the world was ending. One post in particular stood out, a picture of her dorm desk meticulously staged with a sad-looking cup of instant noodles accompanied by a caption that read, "College life, it's not as glamorous as it seems." I stared at it for a long time, battling with myself over whether or not to comment. I wanted so badly to say something like, "You've been living this way for 2 weeks. Try doing it for years and then we can talk about glamour," but in the end I stopped myself. What was the point? Kylie would never truly understand. Still, her public pity party didn't go unnoticed. Her friends and followers flocked to her comments, showering her with messages of support and encouragement, saying things like, "Stay strong, Kylie. You've got this." As if getting a part-time job and having to budget was some insurmountable obstacle, a Herculean task. From what I overheard during strained family phone calls, Kylie wasn't adjusting well to her new reality. She complained to anyone who would listen, playing the victim and endlessly lamenting how unfair it all was, but the sympathy wasn't as forthcoming as she probably hoped. Most people, myself included, were too busy dealing with their own problems to genuinely care about hers. Mom and Dad, of course, tried to soften the blow. They sent her a couple of care packages, nowhere near as extravagant as before, more like a carefully curated selection of the bare minimum, but still enough to subtly remind Kylie that she was, and always would be, the favorite. The bitter irony of it all wasn't lost on me. For years, they told me that struggling was good for me, that it would build character, make me stronger. Now it seemed struggling was only character building if your name wasn't Kylie. Kylie's life was a mess, and everyone was jumping through hoops to keep her from completely falling apart. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck. Still, she wasn't exactly flourishing, she was just barely holding on. Her grades took a nosedive, she struggled to keep up at her job, and the cracks in her perfect little world were getting harder and harder to ignore. Honestly, I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. Meanwhile, Grandpa wasn't just giving me a roof over my head. He was actively helping me rebuild my life, brick by brick. He helped me get my finances in order, pushed me to take a full course load so I could finish college faster, and even brought me into the fold at his bakery. It was such a relief to be around someone who genuinely cared about my future and actually put in the effort to show it. My parents, though, were another story. They kept trying to get in touch. At first, it was relentless. Mom left a stream of voicemails, her tone all over the place, switching between guilt-tripping and offering hollow apologies. "Ellie, honey, we're sorry, okay? We made mistakes, but we're still your parents. We love you." Sure, they loved me, just not enough to treat me like a person when it actually mattered. Dad's messages were more subtle but just as frustrating. Ellie, we know you're upset, but you need to understand where we were coming from. We were trying to do what was best for the family, and now this family needs you. Please, come home. I ignored every single one of them. What was there to say? They weren't sorry for what they did, they were sorry they got caught, and they probably just wanted me back to exploit me one last time. Eventually, the calls slowed to a trickle. I think they finally realized I wasn't going to forgive them just because they wanted me to. Shortly before graduation, Grandpa pulled me aside in the kitchen. Ellie, he said, sliding a worn folder across the table towards me, I've been thinking a lot about the future of the bakery. I opened the folder and found a meticulously organized collection of documents outlining the bakery's operations. Grandpa smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners, the way they always did when he was bursting with pride. You've been such a help around here, and I see how much you love this place. I want you to take over when you're ready. I was completely stunned. Grandpa, are you serious? Of course, I'm serious, he said, his voice firm but gentle. You've earned this, Ellie, and I know you'll make it even better than it already is. Hearing that from him meant the world to me. For so long, I'd felt like my efforts were invisible, like nobody noticed how hard I was working or how much I was struggling. But Grandpa saw. He always had. Taking over the bakery became my sole focus after that. I dove headfirst into learning everything I could about the business, from managing the staff to meticulously balancing the books. Grandpa was there every step of the way, guiding me, offering advice, and sharing his years of wisdom. By the time graduation rolled around, I felt genuinely ready to take the reins. Grandpa officially handed over the business, and we celebrated with a massive party at the bakery. Friends, staff, even some of my professors showed up to congratulate me. It felt like a true turning point. These days, I barely speak to my parents. They're still trying to make amends, acting as if a few flimsy apologies can magically erase the past. What they don't know, and probably won't like, is that Grandpa removed them from his will months ago. They're likely still holding onto the hope that they can somehow worm their way back in, but honestly, that's not my problem anymore. My focus is on the bakery and making Grandpa proud.